Welcome to History in Ashes, where the dust of the past still whispers its secrets into your ears tonight. You are about to stand in the middle of one of the most haunting moments of the 20th century. The year is 1937. The sky is heavy over Lakehurst, New Jersey. A colossal silver giant hovers in the air, an airship longer than some ocean liners, gleaming faintly as twilight gathers. And then it happens. Without warning, fire bursts along the skin of the Hindenburg. It is not a slow glow, but a violent, consuming storm racing from tail to nose. Within half a minute, the ship that took years to design and months to prepare collapses to the ground in a twisted, glowing skeleton. Before we go further into the fire itself, may I ask you something small? Could you pause for a moment, scroll down to the comments, and tell us where you are watching from and what time it is there? It helps us imagine this story reaching out across oceans and cities. And while you are there, if you have not already, please subscribe to this channel. Think of it as fastening your own safety belt on this journey. Unlike the passengers on the Hindenburg, you will not regret having an extra layer of security. Now hold on with me at this moment of fire. You can almost hear the voices below. Families had gathered on the field. Some had binoculars. Some simply looked up. Children pointed with excitement. They wanted to see the pride of Germany, the flying hotel of the sky, completing another routine Atlantic crossing. Air travel, then, was not the simple step into a metal tube that you know today. It was a statement of progress, of national power, of human daring. People came because this was still new, still exotic. They came because the Zeppelin represented not just a machine, but the future, and then in seconds it became the past. The flames spread in such a way that engineers afterwards studied each frame of surviving film again and again. They wanted to know if it was static electricity, if it was sabotage, if the hydrogen had simply betrayed its handlers. To you standing there, it would not matter. The heat was unbearable. The sound of metal crashing to earth like 1,000 broken bells filled the air, and black smoke swallowed the evening sky. Some people ran forward to help, others froze in horror, and a few tried to shield their children's eyes. The smell of burning canvas, fuel, and human fear mingled in the heavy air. This is the climax, the very end. But to understand it, you must step back. A disaster is never simply a moment of fire or collapse. It is the result of many small choices, unnoticed details, and decisions made in distant offices years before. The Hindenburg was built in a world where Germany was reeling from defeat in the Great War, struggling with its place in a global system. It was built at a time when national pride was invested not just in armies but in technologies. The Zeppelin company promised elegance, comfort, and above all, speed. The alternative, ocean liners, took days longer to cross the Atlantic, so the Hindenburg was meant to be a statement, not just a craft. It was the length of 2.5 football fields, taller than most city buildings, and inside it carried dining rooms, promenades, smoking lounges, and cabins lined with white sheets and clean metal fittings. And yet for all its grandeur, it was fragile. It was filled not with helium, the safer choice, but with hydrogen, because the United States controlled helium and refused to export it to Germany. That decision, made in a quiet government office years earlier, sealed the fate of every passenger who boarded the Hindenburg. Hydrogen was cheaper, lighter, and more available, but it was also volatile. Engineers knew this. Crews lived with this knowledge every day. But pride and practicality outweighed fear. When you stepped onto the Hindenburg as a passenger, you trusted men you never met, scientists who argued in reports you never read, and international politics you could not influence. Pause and imagine yourself there. You are not just watching from below, you are inside. You sit in the dining room as waiters in pressed uniforms serve meals prepared in a compact but modern kitchen. You sip coffee, glance out of the window, and see the ocean far below. The hum of engines is steady, a background lull like the sound of a distant train. You feel secure, almost as though you are aboard a floating hotel suspended between continents. You may write letters, walk the promenade, or step into the smoking lounge with its special precautions against open flame. Life inside the Hindenburg is ordinary in its routine, extraordinary in its setting. This contrast between calm order and sudden chaos is what makes the disaster unforgettable. When the fire began, it was not simply machinery burning, it was a dream unraveling. It was the confidence of passengers shattered in seconds. Survivors later remembered how the ship lurched violently as it collapsed, how corridors filled with smoke, how exits became choked with fire. Some leaped from windows, some stumbled through wreckage, some were pulled to safety by those on the ground. Each second was a decision of life or death, yet most had no time to think at all. Now, I want you to reflect on something with me. History is often told as a sequence of grand events, dates, and names. But here, in this fiery end, what mattered were the smallest details. The thickness of fabric treated with flammable dope, the humidity in the air, the spark of static against metal, the position of a crew member opening a valve. Dozens of seemingly boring technicalities aligned into catastrophe. If one had been altered, perhaps the Hindenburg would have landed safely that night. Passengers disembarked, and the airship would have flown again. But it did not. This leaves us with a question that stretches beyond this disaster. When we look at history, how often do we overlook the small choices, the tedious decisions in offices and factories, the dull reports on materials and fuels? Yet again and again, it is those decisions that shape the lives and deaths of ordinary people. You sitting there listening are connected to those passengers by this same truth. Your world too is balanced on choices you may never see. And so as the Hindenburg falls, as fire consumes it from stern to bow, and as reporters' voices crack in horror describing the scene live to the nation, you are left to wonder. If so much could be undone in less than 1 minute, what else in history rests upon fragile details waiting quietly to ignite? You are standing at Lakehurst, New Jersey, on a damp evening in early May of 1937. Imagine the weight of the clouds above you. The storm that rolled through earlier in the day has moved off toward the coast, leaving behind a field that glistens slightly under the scattered light. The air is heavy, full of moisture, the kind of atmosphere that clings to the skin. This is not the brightness of a summer afternoon, but the greyness of a day slipping into evening. The sort of sky that makes colours muted, that dampens sounds, that makes people lower their voices without quite knowing why. Around you, there are hundreds of others. Families with children, groups of men in work shirts, women in neat dresses. Some have travelled from nearby towns simply to witness the spectacle. The arrival of a Zeppelin was still an event. Unlike airplanes that cut across the sky with deafening engines, airships moved with a strange serenity, like whales gliding through an ocean of air. They were not common sights, and the Hindenburg was the largest of them all. To say you had seen it with your own eyes was something to tell neighbours, to recall to children, to anchor in your memory. There is an odd mix of casualness and ceremony in the crowd. Some stand formally, hands folded behind their backs, eyes fixed upward as though they are attending a parade. Others treat it more like a picnic outing, carrying baskets, chatting, and nudging children to pay attention. The press is there too, of course. Journalists, cameramen, and radio reporters, each ready to capture not just the arrival but the atmosphere. Even before the flames, this was a newsworthy moment. The Hindenburg represented progress, prestige, and the promise of the future. Its landing was never only a technical maneuver, it was a performance. Lift your head with the crowd. At first, you see nothing but the low sky. Then a gleam of silver appears, catching the dim light. Slowly the outline grows. The Hindenburg does not rush into view. It slides into it, massive yet gentle, like a mountain that has decided to float. The shape is unmistakable, the long, tapering body, the tail fins like a cross set against the sky, the gondola beneath. It is longer than the tallest skyscrapers in most cities, but from this distance it looks smooth, almost delicate. As it moves closer, you feel the tension in the crowd shift. People straighten their backs, point with fingers, murmur to one another. The ship is here. The engines hum. 4 Daimler-Benz diesels, powerful but muffled by distance. The sound is not like an airplane's roar, not something that dominates. It is a steady vibration, audible but not overwhelming. The airship glides at about 100 feet above the ground, close enough now that you can make out the outlines of windows, the hint of faces looking down. You realize that those inside are watching you as well, looking at the crowd that has gathered to greet them. For the passengers, it is the end of a journey. For the crowd, it is the climax of a performance. Inside the Hindenburg, the mood is equally expectant. The crossing has taken about 3 days. 3 days of meals in the dining room, of conversations in the lounge, of peering down at the vast stretch of Atlantic Ocean. 3 days of the strange combination of routine and wonder. Some passengers are businessmen, eager to make meetings in New York. Some are wealthy travelers, savoring the novelty of flying in luxury across the ocean. A few are journalists themselves, traveling for stories. Many are Germans, proud to sail in their country's flagship vessel, a symbol of national achievement. Crew members have been working steadily as well. Airships require constant adjustment, even in calm skies. Valves are opened, ballast is trimmed, engines monitored. The captain and officers communicate with the ground crew by radio, waiting for the right moment to descend. Everything must be done precisely, for a Zeppelin does not land easily. It must be walked down to the ground by men holding ropes, guided carefully to its mooring mast. The process is as much manual labor as it is mechanical procedure. That evening, delays had already tested patience. Storms had forced the Hindenburg to circle before approaching Lakehurst. Hours later than planned, the ship finally received clearance. The delay meant the crowd below had waited longer than expected. Some had left, but many remained, unwilling to miss the arrival. That waiting only heightened the sense of anticipation. It is one thing to see a Zeppelin arrive on time. It is another to watch it emerge from clouds after hours of expectation. Imagine yourself as a passenger in those final minutes. You gather your things. Perhaps you adjust your coat, glance at your reflection in the polished metal of the cabin walls, fold a letter you had written during the voyage. The steward comes by to check on you. Someone jokes about the lateness of the arrival. You lean out the window and see cars lined up below, small dots waiting at the airfield. The engines shift pitch as the airship begins its descent. You feel the tilt as it angles downward, the faint vibration of machinery adjusting trim. You expect within minutes to be stepping onto solid ground again. Meanwhile, on the ground, the Navy crew is ready. Dozens of sailors line up, trained in the choreography of handling ropes. Each knows his place, each movement practiced. The mooring mast stands prepared, the field cleared. The officers call instructions, checking watches, looking skyward. This is not the first Zeppelin they have handled, but it is the largest. The size of the ship means the coordination of men below and crew above must be exact. It is not simply a matter of pulling on ropes. The balance of the entire vessel depends on timing, on weight distribution, on calm, steady effort. The crowd senses the importance of the moment. Children strain for a better look. Journalists ready cameras. Radio reporter Herbert Morrison, whose voice would soon become iconic in its shock, tests his equipment. No one expects the drama to come. The routine has lulled them. Airships have landed safely here before. They will do so again. There is no reason to doubt. And yet, if you pay close attention to the mood, you might notice something else. That slight unease that comes whenever human beings attempt something grand. That feeling that this machine, so large and strange, does not quite belong in the natural order. The very marvel of the Hindenburg carries within it a shadow of doubt. The Zeppelin hangs above the field now, preparing to release ropes. Its silver skin gleams in patches where the light touches it, but the rest blends with the grey of the sky. It is beautiful in a way that is difficult to describe. Massive, smooth, silent. and impossibly graceful. To some, it represents progress. To others, perhaps, it looks like hubris. To you, standing there, it looks like both. Time stretches in those moments before the disaster. The waiting, the adjustments, the quiet hum of engines, the sailors bracing themselves, the crowd craning necks. Each small action is part of a choreography, yet history has already decided how this scene will end. All that remains is for those present to live through the final calm before the storm. And this raises the question, in those long moments of expectation, could anyone have sensed the danger waiting in the air? Or is it only afterward, when flames consume the sky, that the silence before feels like a warning? To understand why so many people gathered at Lakehurst on that evening in 1937, you must place yourself in the world of the 1930s, an era when airships were not simply machines but promises. Imagine yourself in that decade. The Great Depression had scarred much of the globe. Factories stood silent in some cities. Families lived with rationed incomes. Political tensions stirred across Europe. Nations sought symbols of strength and hope, tangible proof that progress had not stalled. Technology often provided those symbols. Radios connected homes to distant voices. Automobiles carried families farther than before. But in the sky, nothing seemed to match the wonder of the airship. Airplanes existed, yes, but they were noisy, small, and often unreliable for long journeys. They were cramped, bumpy, and reserved for the daring or the wealthy. Ocean liners still carried the majority of travelers across the Atlantic, but ships meant days at sea, prone to storms and seasickness. The Zeppelin offered something different, a vision of calm and speed combined. It was not as fast as a plane, not as stable as a ship, but it promised comfort above the clouds, an entirely new way of crossing oceans. In the 1930s, Germany carried special weight in this story. The Zeppelin Company had existed before the Great War, and Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin had already turned his dream into reality decades earlier. Germans were proud of their airships, viewing them as national achievements. After the war, restrictions placed on Germany limited what could be built. But by the late 1920s and early 1930s, airship projects returned with renewed force. They were not just machines. They were symbols of national identity, a way to say to the world, here we are, modern, capable, and visionary. For travelers, the Zeppelin offered something almost luxurious. Inside the Hindenburg, you could stroll along a promenade deck, dine at tables served by uniformed stewards, and sleep in cabins that, while small, were neat and private. The experience was closer to staying in a hotel than boarding a plane. Imagine walking along the windows, looking down at the clouds passing beneath you, writing letters at a desk while the engines hummed steadily outside. It was air travel, not as endurance but as leisure. Newspapers carried photographs of well-dressed passengers sipping drinks in lounge chairs high above the ocean. The idea that you could cross the Atlantic in 3 days without seasickness, without turbulence, without the confinement of an airplane, was astonishing. For governments, the Zeppelin carried political meaning. In Germany, the regime in power during the 1930s saw airships as propaganda tools. They sent Zeppelins to fly over cities, their long silver bodies visible for miles, carrying messages of power. They wanted the world to see German engineering not just on the ground, but dominating the skies. Each successful flight was a statement. Each arrival in a foreign country was a chance to demonstrate national prestige. But for ordinary people, the meaning of airships was subtler, more personal. They were wonders to behold. A farmer standing in a field might look up and see a Zeppelin drift overhead, silent and slow, and feel connected to a larger world. A child might remember forever the moment an airship passed over his town, larger than any building, almost touching the clouds. Communities would gather when word spread that a Zeppelin was near. It was like the circus coming to town, only in the sky. The sight of such a machine gave people a sense of living in modern times, of witnessing the future unfold before their eyes. At the same time, airships carried an aura of danger. People remembered accidents. The Rhone 101, a British airship, had crashed in 1930, killing many. The American Navy had also lost airships. Yet, despite these tragedies, the dream persisted. The idea of moving entire families, cargo, and messages across oceans with serene grace was too powerful to abandon. Airships remained in service because people wanted to believe in them. Progress always carries with it the shadow of risk. Consider also the economics. To travel on the Hindenburg was expensive. It was not for the common worker, but for the wealthy or the important. Tickets across the Atlantic could cost hundreds of dollars at the time, equal to thousands today. That exclusivity added to the allure. Passengers were often businessmen, diplomats, journalists, or those with special means. They represented the thin slice of society who could afford to live in the future before the future became affordable for all. Yet airships were not only about luxury. They carried mail. Letters stamped with "by Zeppelin" travelled faster than by ship, linking continents more efficiently. For many, seeing a Zeppelin meant not just marvelling at its size, but recognizing its role in shrinking the distance between Europe and America. In an era when communication still moved slowly, this was no small thing. The Zeppelin was part of knitting the world closer together. The design itself contributed to the symbolism. The Hindenburg was longer than 8 city buses placed end to end, yet it moved with the grace of a bird. Its silvery skin reflected the light, making it appear at times ghostly, otherworldly. At night, when illuminated by spotlights or the glow of its own windows, it seemed like a floating city of stars. No wonder crowds gathered. No wonder children pointed upward in awe. To witness a Zeppelin was to feel history bending, to feel the boundaries of possibility stretched. But remember the time. The 1930s were an age of contradictions. They were years of hardship, when families queued for bread, when unemployment drained communities. And yet they were also years when people dreamed of speed, of machines, of conquering the natural world. Skyscrapers reached higher, radios spoke farther, automobiles spread wider. The Zeppelin fit perfectly into that dreamscape. It was futuristic yet present, unreachable yet visible. So when the Hindenburg approached Lakehurst that evening, it was not just another arrival. It was the embodiment of these hopes. To the passengers inside, it meant arrival in America in record time. To the journalists on the field, it meant headlines. To the families watching, it meant a story to tell for years. To the German government, it meant prestige. To the engineers, it meant proof of concept. To the crew, it meant another successful crossing in a career of routine flights. Each person invested the airship with meaning. This is why the disaster mattered so much. The fire destroyed more than a vessel. It destroyed an idea, the notion that humanity could float across oceans in calm luxury aboard massive silver giants. After the wreck, people looked at airships differently. The same size that had inspired awe now looked like vulnerability. The same silence that had suggested peace now seemed ominous. The Hindenburg's fall was the end not just of a ship, but of an era. Think about this carefully. How often does history place so much hope in one machine, one symbol, one fragile promise? And how often do those promises collapse, not because people stop dreaming, but because reality refuses to cooperate? The Hindenburg burned, but in burning it revealed something about the limits of human ambition. And so I leave you with this question. If you had lived in the 1930s, standing on the ground as the Hindenburg floated above, would you have believed in the future it represented? Or would you have looked at its fragile skin and wondered how long such dreams could endure? When you look at photographs of the Hindenburg, it appears seamless, as if someone simply inflated a silver whale and sent it into the sky. But beneath that smooth skin lay years of planning, hundreds of workers, thousands of sheets of metal, fabric, and wire, and an entire philosophy of engineering that carried both brilliance and fragility. The story begins with Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, a retired German general who in the late 19th century dreamed of controlled flight using lighter-than-air craft. His vision survived ridicule, early failures, and crashes. By the early 20th century, Zeppelin airships had become reliable enough to be used for passenger service and military reconnaissance. During the Great War, they even dropped bombs over London, terrifying civilians with the sight of giant machines floating in the night sky. After the war, restrictions were placed on Germany's ability to build such ships, but the dream never entirely faded. By the 1920s, Zeppelin technology advanced again, spurred by national pride and by the determination of Hugo Eckener, a man who carried Count Zeppelin's dream forward. Eckener was more than just a businessman. He was a publicist, a strategist, and a believer in the cultural power of the airship. Under his leadership, the company produced successful craft like the Graf Zeppelin, which completed flights around the world. These successes gave confidence that an even larger vessel could dominate transatlantic travel. And so the Hindenburg was conceived. Its official designation was LZ 129. It would be the largest airship ever built, designed to carry passengers in unmatched comfort. Construction began at Friedrichshafen, on the shores of Lake Constance in southern Germany, inside a hangar vast enough to house the enormous framework. Workers used aluminum alloy girders, riveted together to form the skeleton of a cigar-shaped body. The structure itself was a masterpiece light, but strong, flexible, yet rigid enough to maintain its aerodynamic shape. The airship measured over 800 feet in length and more than 100 feet in diameter. To give perspective, it was longer than the Titanic, taller than most skyscrapers of the time if stood on end. The sheer scale of the craft was part of its appeal. It was not just a vessel, it was a statement of possibility. The fact that human beings could design and assemble something so massive and then lift it into the air was itself a kind of miracle. But miracles depend on details. The skin of the Hindenburg was made of cotton fabric, stretched over the frame, and coated with a mixture of varnishes and aluminum powder to make it airtight and reflective. This coating gave it the gleaming silver appearance that people remembered, but it also contained compounds that, in certain conditions, could be flammable. It was one of the many small compromises that engineers made, decisions that seemed practical at the time, but would later haunt history. Inside the hull, 16 enormous gas cells filled with hydrogen provided the lift. Each was made of a special material called gold-beater's skin, derived from the intestines of cattle, processed and layered to make a thin but durable membrane. It took the intestines of hundreds of thousands of animals to produce enough material for a single Zeppelin. This unglamorous fact reminds you how even the most futuristic machines depend on the humblest, sometimes uncomfortable sources. Hydrogen was chosen not because it was safe, but because helium was unavailable. The United States controlled the world's helium supply and refused to export it to Germany, especially under the political climate of the 1930s. So, the builders accepted the risk of hydrogen. It was lighter, abundant, and cheap. That choice sealed the ship's fate long before its final flight. Propulsion came from 4 diesel engines, each mounted in separate gondolas along the sides of the hull. They provided enough power to push the ship at speeds up to 80 miles per hour. This was not as fast as an airplane, but it was considerably faster than an ocean liner. More importantly, it allowed the airship to cross the Atlantic in less than half the time it took a ship. For passengers who valued speed but also comfort, this was revolutionary. The gondola beneath the hull contained the control room, radio equipment, and crew quarters. Above and within the hull, catwalks stretched across the vast spaces between gas cells, allowing crew members to inspect valves, adjust lines, and monitor conditions. To work inside an airship was to live in a suspended world of girders and fabric, surrounded by thousands of cubic meters of flammable gas. It required a certain calmness of mind, a willingness to trust procedures and training. The passenger spaces were designed with comfort in mind. Cabins lined the sides of the hull, each with simple but neat furnishings. A bed, a small desk, a sink. The walls were thin but painted white to feel clean and modern. Bathrooms used chemical toilets to conserve weight. There was a dining room with tables set for dozens, a lounge with large windows where travelers could gaze out at the sky, even a smoking room, an almost unbelievable feature given the hydrogen above, but one made possible by careful sealing and by electric lighters instead of matches. For its time, it was a floating hotel, offering amenities no airplane could match. Everything about the Hindenburg was meant to inspire trust and admiration. Its size was its selling point. Its elegance was its shield against doubt. Its German origin tied it to a narrative of national pride. And yet, beneath the polished dining tables and gleaming skin, every detail contained compromise. Aluminum was chosen for lightness, but bent under stress. Fabric was doped with chemicals that reflected sunlight but burned fiercely. Hydrogen lifted the ship but turned the entire craft into a potential torch. Engineers were not ignorant of these risks. They debated them. They wrote reports, proposed modifications, considered alternatives. But economics, politics, and pride all pressed toward completion. To cancel the Hindenburg would have meant loss of face, loss of investment, and loss of prestige. So the airship flew, magnificent but vulnerable. Construction itself became a performance. Visitors toured the hangars, newspapers published photographs of the massive frame under assembly, dignitaries praised the achievement. Workers climbed scaffolds, riveted girders, stretched fabric, stitched seams. For them, it was labor, sometimes dangerous, often repetitive. For the world, it was spectacle. This disjunction between the hidden toil of ordinary workers and the public image of sleek modernity is a reminder of how history's symbols are built on unglamorous foundations. When the Hindenburg was completed, it was more than a machine. It was a national emblem. The first flights drew crowds, newspapers hailed its elegance, passengers marveled at the calm of transatlantic crossings. The Zeppelin company promoted it tirelessly. Posters showed it gliding over landmarks, advertisements promised smooth journeys, photographs captured passengers sipping wine above the ocean. And yet, the engineering marvel carried fragility in its bones. Each bolt, each seam, each decision carried weight. It is easy to admire the Hindenburg from afar, to see only the shining hull. But when you look closely, you realize it was a craft built on 1,000 small compromises, each necessary, each logical, yet together creating the conditions for catastrophe. That is the paradox of engineering marvels. They appear inevitable once built, as if they could not have been otherwise. But in truth they are precarious, balanced on choices, materials, and political circumstances. The Hindenburg looked timeless, but it was a product of its time, and it would perish because of its time. So when you think of the Hindenburg not as a burning wreck, but as a creation, you must hold two truths together. It was one of the most advanced airships ever built, a testimony to human skill and ambition. And it was also doomed from the moment it left the hangar, betrayed by the very details that made it possible. And here is the question for you: when you admire a great machine today, do you think about the hidden compromises inside it? Or do you, like those who first gazed upon the Hindenburg, allow the gleam of its surface to hide the fragility within? Close your eyes and imagine yourself stepping aboard the Hindenburg in 1937. You enter not through a crowded airport terminal or a noisy boarding ramp, but through a stairway leading into the gondola attached beneath the ship's vast body. A steward in crisp uniform greets you with quiet efficiency. You are not herded or rushed. There are fewer than 100 passengers on this ship, and every one of them is noticed. You hand over your coat, you exchange polite nods with fellow travelers, and you begin to feel not like cargo but like a guest. Your cabin is small, but it is yours. A narrow bed folded neatly with white sheets, a little desk where you might write letters, a sink gleaming under the light. The walls are thin, you can hear faint movements beyond them, yet the impression is one of order and cleanliness. For someone accustomed to cramped train compartments or storm-tossed ship cabins, this feels like progress. You unpack, set your things in place, and already sense the unusual rhythm of travel by airship. The hum of the engines is steady, deeper than the buzz of an airplane, more like the background throb of a distant ship's propeller. It becomes a kind of lull, a sound you cease to notice after a while. The floor under your feet is firm, with only the slightest sway. The ship is so massive that turbulence seems smoothed out. You walk without fear of stumbling. This is not the jostling of an airplane. This is steadiness, calm, as if the airship were gliding on invisible rails across the sky. Meals are taken in the dining room. Tables are arranged neatly, with linen cloths, polished cutlery, and attentive stewards serving dishes prepared in a surprisingly compact kitchen. Breakfast might be eggs, rolls, and coffee. Lunch might include soup, meat, and vegetables, accompanied by wine. Dinner is a more elaborate affair, with several courses, conversation flowing, and passengers lingering to talk. Imagine yourself seated by a window sipping coffee, glancing out at the ocean far below. You are suspended between continents, but the rituals of dining anchor you to a sense of normalcy. After meals, many gather in the lounge. Large windows line the walls, offering views across thousands of miles of sea or over the patchwork of European fields. Some passengers bring cameras, photographing the horizon. Others write in journals, describing the novelty of floating so high. The lounge has chairs upholstered for comfort, tables for cards or reading. There is even a piano, though its notes must compete with the hum of the engines. Conversation ranges from business to politics, from family stories to remarks on the view. You are aware that you are part of a small exclusive community, a few dozen people sharing the same suspended world. There is a smoking lounge, astonishingly, given the hydrogen above. But engineers designed it carefully pressurized, ventilated, equipped with electric lighters instead of matches. To step inside is to join others in one of the most ordinary rituals of the time, smoking together, while outside the thin walls lies one of the most flammable substances known. That contrast ordinary habit beside extraordinary risk defines life aboard the Hindenburg. For passengers, the days are slow, but filled with gentle routines. You wake, eat, stroll the promenade, watch the world pass below, read, write, converse, sleep. You might glance out and see ships on the Atlantic, tiny specks moving across vast grey water. You might peer down at Greenland's ice, or later at the coast of Newfoundland as land appears again. Time moves differently in the airship, not with the urgency of flight or the boredom of sea voyages, but with a curious balance between the two. The crew lives differently. For them, life is work. Dozens of men are required to keep the ship safe. Engineers tend the engines, monitoring temperatures, oil, and fuel. Navigators chart courses, adjusting for winds and weather. Radio operators tap out messages, receiving reports from stations along the coast. Stewards serve passengers, clean cabins, prepare meals. High above, inside the hull, riggers walk narrow catwalks between hydrogen cells, inspecting valves and lines. Their world is one of girders and thin fabric, of constant vigilance. For them, the airship is not a luxury hotel, but a demanding workplace, one that never rests. The captain and officers bear particular responsibility. They balance the airship with ballast, adjusting valves to release gas, ordering water ballast dropped when needed, trimming the ship so it stays level. Each decision requires precision. An airship does not forgive mistakes. The captain's presence is calm, authoritative. He knows that passengers watch him, that their confidence depends on his composure. His voice is steady, his orders measured. Daily life on the Hindenburg is, in many ways, a triumph of ordinary details. Clean linens, polished floors, regular meals, clear announcements. Behind the glamour of posters and photographs lies the simple work of maintaining routine. Without routine, there would be fear. With routine, there is trust. That trust is the most fragile element aboard, yet it is what keeps passengers at ease. Consider the sensory world inside, the faint vibration of engines, the steady hum that becomes the background to every thought. The filtered air circulating through vents, sometimes tinged with the smell of diesel, the creak of the frame as the ship shifts slightly in crosswinds, the footsteps of stewards in narrow corridors, the murmur of conversation in the lounge, the occasional laughter of children peering out the windows. All these sounds and sensations create a world that is both unusual and strangely domestic. What did it feel like to sleep aboard? Passengers lay in narrow bunks, wrapped in blankets, lulled by the hum of engines. Some slept deeply, trusting the ship entirely. Others, perhaps, felt the unease of knowing they rested inside a hull filled with hydrogen. But most accounts suggest comfort, calmness, even luxury compared to days on a tossing ocean liner. To wake in the morning and look out at the endless sky was a novelty few could forget. For the crew, sleep came in shifts. Some worked through the night, monitoring instruments, tending engines, pacing the long catwalks. Life for them was not about comfort but about vigilance. They were the unseen guardians of the ship's stability. Passengers rarely saw them, except in passing. Yet without them, no journey was possible. This division, passengers at leisure, crew at labor, reflects a truth about much of history. Comfort is built on unseen work. The elegance of a dining room depends on the labor of cooks in a hot kitchen. The calm of the lounge depends on engineers sweating over machinery. The glamour of photographs depends on riggers climbing beams in silence. The Hindenburg, like every great machine, concealed as much as it revealed. And yet, for those aboard, daily life felt secure. That is why the disaster struck so deeply. People did not see themselves as taking a great risk. They were living, eating, sleeping, writing, playing cards. They were carried not into danger but into routine. Disaster, when it came, shattered not just lives but the illusion of safety that routine had created. Think of the letters written on board, the photographs taken, the meals half-eaten when the fire began. These fragments remind us that history is not only grand events but interrupted routines. The Hindenburg's passengers lived ordinary days in an extraordinary setting, unaware that each detail, each polished surface, each careful meal, each quiet night was perched above a fuel waiting to ignite. So as you walk again in your mind through those corridors, as you lean against the window and gaze at the Atlantic below, as you sip coffee in the lounge, remember, you are not living in a disaster. You are living in the fragile ordinariness that disaster interrupts. And you might ask yourself this: how many of our own routines rest quietly on risks we choose not to see? You and I have walked the corridors of the Hindenburg as if we were passengers, savoring the meals, watching the world from the windows, and resting in cabins arranged with simple comfort. But now imagine stepping past a door marked for crew only. The polished veneer of luxury gives way to narrow passageways, steel ladders, dim lighting, and the low vibration of machinery. Life here is not measured by comfort, but by tasks, by schedules, by unending vigilance. The Hindenburg carried a crew of more than 40 men. That number alone tells you something. To keep fewer than 100 passengers safe, it required almost half as many crew to tend the ship. Compare that to the handful of attendants on an airplane today, and you begin to see the burden of an airship. Every role mattered, every hand was necessary. There were officers, engineers, riggers, radio operators, cooks, stewards, and more. Each belonged to a hierarchy, each followed orders, yet each carried an individual weight of responsibility. Begin with the command crew. At the top was Captain Max Pruss. He bore ultimate responsibility for the ship, its passengers, and its reputation. Pruss was a man seasoned in airship flight, calm and deliberate. He was not alone in command. Alongside him were officers such as Albert Samt, the first officer, and other watch officers who shared duties in shifts. Navigation was constant, unlike a train that runs on rails. The Hindenburg moved through winds that shifted hour by hour. Every adjustment in ballast, every decision on altitude, every change in speed demanded calculation. Officers studied weather reports, plotted positions, compared instruments. They were not just steering a ship, they were managing a delicate balance between lift, weight, wind, and fuel. The engineering crew formed the heartbeat of the ship. In the gondola and within engine cars slung along the sides of the hull, they tended to 4 great diesel engines. Each engine roared with power, driving the Hindenburg across the Atlantic. But machines are fickle. Oil must be measured, fuel lines checked, temperatures monitored. The engineers stood watch over dials and gauges, ears attuned to any irregular sound. A slip in fuel pressure, an overheating cylinder, a vibration beyond the ordinary, each could spell trouble. The airship was vast, but it was not invulnerable. Every minute demanded attention. Riggers performed some of the most dangerous and least visible tasks. Imagine climbing narrow catwalks high inside the hull, hundreds of feet above the gondola, with only thin fabric separating you from the sky. Around you stretched cells of hydrogen, more than 7 million cubic feet of it, contained in fabric bags that filled the ship's interior. The riggers inspected these cells, checked valves and lines, adjusted vents. They walked beams, crouched in shadows, and trusted their balance as the ship shifted with winds. For them, the Hindenburg was not a smooth lounge but a skeleton of girders and ropes. Their world was wind, fabric, and constant risk. Few passengers ever saw them at work, but without riggers, the ship could not fly. Radio operators kept the Hindenburg connected to the ground. They tapped out messages across the Atlantic, sending updates on position and weather, receiving instructions and news. Their cabin was small, filled with equipment, headphones crackling with signals. This was not just a luxury of communication, it was essential. Weather across the ocean was unpredictable, and reports from coastal stations could alter a course or a landing plan. The operators lived in a world of code, static, and endless listening. Stewards lived closer to the passengers' world, yet their work was no less demanding. They served meals, cleaned cabins, answered questions, carried luggage. They moved quietly, always present, yet never intrusive. To the passengers, they embodied the promise of service and safety. Yet behind their calm demeanor lay constant pressure. Food had to be prepared in a small galley, water rationed, supplies managed. Stewards worked long hours, visible to passengers during the day, and tidying unseen late into the night. Then there were the cooks, men who created elaborate meals in a kitchen far smaller than one would expect. Their tools were limited, their storage restricted, yet they managed to serve multiple courses each day. Their work required planning how to stretch supplies across a voyage, how to balance luxury with practicality, how to satisfy passengers who paid dearly for the journey. In their hot, cramped kitchen, they created the illusion of abundance. Think too of the discipline that bound all these men. The Hindenburg was a German vessel, and discipline was part of its fabric. Orders flowed from officers to crew, routines were followed, hierarchy respected. Each man knew his station, his duties, and the expectation of precision. Mistakes were not tolerated. Yet, alongside discipline, was camaraderie. Men lived together in close quarters, shared meals, swapped stories in the little time they had free. They trusted one another, for they had to. An airship left no room for divided loyalties. Consider the rhythms of their day. Watches rotated in shifts, some men working while others slept. There was no true night on the Hindenburg, only the alternating of tasks. In the engine cars, the throb of machinery drowned out all else. In the navigation cabin, charts and instruments glowed under lamps. In the rigging, wind and fabric creaked softly. Crewmen slept in bunks stacked close together, often in the same uniform they would rise to wear again. Rest was brief, yet essential. Life for the crew was not glamorous. They did not sip wine in lounges or stroll promenades. They lived in service to the machine and to its passengers. Yet many of them believed in the airship's future. They were proud of their work, proud to be part of a venture that promised to shrink the world. To crew the Hindenburg was to stand at the forefront of technology, to belong to something larger than oneself. That pride softened the hardships of labor, but hardships there were. The engines were loud, the air often heavy with diesel fumes. The rigging was dangerous, the catwalks narrow. Sleep was scarce, shifts long. Pay was not lavish. And always, unspoken, was the knowledge that hydrogen filled the ship around them. Accidents had happened before on other airships. Fire was a constant spectre. Yet men worked, focused on tasks, because to dwell on danger would paralyze. Discipline, duty, and routine were the shields against fear. There is a certain humility in looking at the crew's life. Passengers remembered the dining rooms and the views. Historians recalled the disaster. But the crew lived the work, the oil under their nails, the ache in their muscles, the endless checking of dials, the slow climb along beams, the heat of the galley, the monotony of service. Their lives remind us that great machines are never only about innovation or glamour. They are about labor, carried out by ordinary people with steady hands. When disaster struck, it was these men who acted with speed and courage. Engineers cut engines, officers shouted orders, stewards tried to guide passengers, riggers leapt from catwalks. Many died in that final moment because they were at their posts where duty placed them. Their work in life was maintenance. Their work in death was sacrifice. So, as you think of the Hindenburg, do not only picture the passengers gazing through windows. Picture also the men in engine cars, in radio cabins, in narrow bunks, in kitchens, in rigging. Their world was not luxury, but responsibility, and their story, though quieter, is just as essential. And so, we might ask, when we look back on history, do we remember only the passengers, or do we also remember the crew who carried the weight of flight on their shoulders? Picture the scene on that afternoon in early May of 1937. The airship had crossed the Atlantic smoothly, its crew having navigated days of travel above waves and shifting skies. Yet, the voyage did not end upon sighting land. For an airship, the final moments, the descent, the mooring, the handling of ropes were often the most delicate. And so the Hindenburg's officers were watching the weather with almost obsessive attention as they approached Lakehurst, New Jersey. You might think of weather as mere background, something that can be checked casually with a glance. But for airships, weather was everything. The Hindenburg was enormous, longer than 2 football fields, its surface area vast, its frame sensitive to the slightest push of wind. Unlike today's aircraft, which can land on long runways and fight against gusts with sheer power, an airship's landing required cooperation with the air. To moor safely, the ship needed calm conditions, predictable winds, and a crew on the ground ready to handle it. Anything less, and the process could turn treacherous. On that particular day, the weather in New Jersey was unstable. Reports told of storms earlier in the afternoon, thunderstorms rolling through the region, lightning crackling across the horizon. By the time the Hindenburg approached the coast, conditions had improved, but not completely. The skies had cleared, yet the ground remained damp, the air heavy with humidity. Winds shifted, sometimes gusting suddenly, then calming. For the officers aboard, this mattered more than it might to you and me today. They had to decide, proceed with the landing now, or circle longer, waiting for conditions to steady. The Hindenburg did not operate on whim. Schedules pressed it forward. Passengers were eager to disembark, to set foot on American soil, to meet family, friends, and business partners. The crew on the ground at Lakehurst had already been waiting, standing in open fields with mooring lines prepared, their uniforms damp from earlier rain. Delays cost time, fuel, and patience, and so Captain Pruss and his officers studied the sky, weighed reports, and chose to proceed. Now think for a moment about what weather meant to people in that era. Forecasting was limited. Meteorologists had tools, but they lack the radar and satellites we take for granted. Reports came from stations scattered across the coast, telegraphed and relayed. Conditions could change between one report and the next. To an airship officer, this meant living with uncertainty. They could plan, but they could not know fully. And so experience, instinct, and caution were their guides. The air that evening was warm, unusually so for early May. Humidity clung to every surface. You know this feeling if you have walked outside after a storm, when the air is thick, when clothes seem heavier, when even breathing feels different. Such conditions matter more than comfort when hydrogen is the lifting gas. Hydrogen reacts. Hydrogen is sensitive. Moisture in the air, static in the atmosphere, shifts in pressure, all these form part of the environment in which the ship existed. Observers on the ground described the sky as clearing, but not fully settled. The sun dipped lower, light filtered through the last of the clouds, casting an uneven glow. To the west, clouds still gathered. The ground crew at Lakehurst, trained and accustomed to such arrivals, watched with cautious eyes. They had moored airships before, knew the strain of pulling ropes in wind, knew the danger of sudden gusts. Some perhaps wondered if it might have been wiser to wait, but orders were orders. The Hindenburg was coming down. On board, the officers managed ballast to adjust the ship's trim. They released water to lighten weight, shifted ballast to balance. Unlike an airplane that simply approaches a runway, an airship must be trimmed carefully to maintain level descent. A nose too heavy or tail too heavy could complicate the approach. And trimming itself was influenced by weather. As humidity increased, hydrogen lifted less efficiently. As temperature shifted, so too did the balance of forces. Every adjustment was a calculation, every release of ballast a decision made in light of the conditions outside. Think of the passengers as they looked out windows during this time. They might have seen the green fields below, the outlines of trees, the waiting crowd. Perhaps they felt relief after days over the ocean. But what they may not have noticed was the subtle rocking of the ship as winds nudged it, the small corrections made by the crew. To them, this might have felt like routine. To the officers, it was constant vigilance. And here we encounter a curious detail. Accounts differ on just how severe the conditions were. Some ground crew later recalled that the winds were manageable, nothing unusual. Others spoke of shifting gusts, a restlessness in the air. Such contradictions remind us that weather is not only physical but also experienced. One man feels calm where another senses danger. What is certain is that conditions were not ideal. Dampness lingered, humidity high, the memory of storms close by. Historians have long debated the role of weather in the disaster. Was it merely background, or did it contribute directly? Some theories suggest that the moisture on the ship's skin, combined with the movements of ropes and lines, built up static charge. Others argue that shifting winds complicated the landing, creating strain in the structure. There are no definitive answers, but the weather cannot be dismissed. It was the stage upon which every moment unfolded. What strikes me is how ordinary it must have felt in those final minutes. No storm raged, no lightning flashed directly above. The airship descended in what seemed to be tolerable conditions. Passengers smiled, stewards prepared, ground crew waited. And yet, hidden in the ordinary, lay conditions ripe for disaster. This is the quiet danger of weather. It does not always announce itself in dramatic ways. Sometimes it is the humidity in the air, the dampness of ropes, the residue of earlier rain, the faint gust at the wrong moment. Imagine standing on the field at Lakehurst, watching the great silver form approach. The grass still wet from rain, the air heavy, your shirt clinging slightly to your back. You hold a rope, ready to catch it when it drops from the ship's nose. The ship looms larger, descending slowly, majestically. You feel only the slight shifting of wind across your face. Would you think danger lurked? Or would you trust that men above and around you had it under control? It is easy, in hindsight, to search for signs. But for those present, the weather was not extraordinary. It was ordinary enough to proceed, and yet that ordinariness proved deceptive. In history, how often has disaster come not from the dramatic storm, but from the subtle conditions unnoticed until too late? And so we are left to wonder, if the storms had lingered longer, forcing delay, would the landing have happened differently? If the winds had been calmer, if the air less humid, would the spark have never come? How much of history rests not on human decisions alone, but on the quiet whims of weather, unnoticed yet decisive? You are standing among them now. The field at Lakehurst stretches wide, flat, prepared for an arrival that has already been delayed. Around you gather families, reporters, photographers, and Navy men in formation. The mood is neither frantic nor festive, but something in between. There is patience, curiosity, and above all the sense of witnessing a spectacle. Why were so many drawn to the landing of an airship? After all, this was not the first time the Hindenburg crossed the Atlantic. Yet each arrival drew attention, for the ship itself was unlike anything else. Few people could afford passage aboard, but anyone could stand on the ground and watch it descend, see the enormous form glide through the air, hear the hum of engines above. It was theatre mixed with engineering. Children tugged at their parents' hands, pointing upward when the silver giant appeared on the horizon. Journalists checked their cameras, loading film, adjusting lenses. For them, this was work, but also prestige, capturing the moment of arrival, a symbol of technology, linking continents. Some of them had been present at other landings, yet the scale of the Zeppelin never lost its power to impress. To photograph it was to record progress itself. Scattered among the crowd were families awaiting passengers. They had driven hours, sometimes from neighboring states, to greet relatives returning from Europe. They carried flowers, small gifts, warm coats in case the evening grew cold. They craned their necks upward as the airship drew closer, searching the windows, wondering if they could glimpse their loved one inside waving down. That is what made these events more than technical procedures. They were personal. Behind the statistics of weight and ballast were human stories, reunions anticipated, embraces soon to come. And then there were the Navy personnel, standing not as spectators but as workers, each assigned to a task. For them, the arrival of a Zeppelin was a job requiring precision. Their uniforms grew damp in the moist air, their boots pressed into the wet ground. They held positions, awaiting orders. They had moored airships before, and knew the strain in the arms, the burn in the hands when the ropes pulled taut. Their discipline contrasted with the casual excitement of the crowd. Yet even they could not help but glance upward, for the sight of the Hindenburg was overwhelming even to the experienced. Among those present was a small group of radio broadcasters. Equipment stood ready, microphones prepared to carry live descriptions of the landing to audiences far away. This was still a novelty that a moment in New Jersey could be heard almost instantly in homes across the nation. The voices of announcers described what they saw, adding drama for listeners who could only imagine the scene. They knew the value of detail, the need to keep people hooked. Words mattered as much as images. Consider for a moment how unusual it was for ordinary people to gather simply to watch an arrival. Today we might not pause to watch a plane land, but in the 1930s flight was still a wonder. An airship was not only a machine but a symbol, and people wanted to say they had seen it. They would tell neighbours, they would write letters, they would remember. It was a point of pride, a mark of living in a modern age. The crowd at Lakehurst stood patiently through delays. Earlier rain had sent some seeking shelter, but most returned once word spread that the Hindenburg was nearing. They had waited before, and they would wait again. For them, anticipation was part of the experience. To see the Zeppelin emerge from the clouds, to watch it lower itself, to stand near something so large this was worth the time. Notice the details of their waiting. Cigarettes lit in the damp evening air, children running small circles in the grass before being hushed by parents. The murmur of voices carrying across the field, blending into a soft background hum. Reporters with notepads jotting lines they would later shape into headlines. Some spectators shielded their eyes from the last rays of sun. Others lifted binoculars for a closer look. Each was engaged in the act of watching, but each for a slightly different reason. And yet, none of them could foresee what they were about to witness. To them, this was routine. The Hindenburg had crossed safely many times before. There was no reason to expect disaster. The passengers would disembark, families would reunite, journalists would file their stories, the crowd would disperse. That is what they believed. This ordinariness is what makes the testimony of spectators later so haunting. Their words, recorded after the event, often begin with how normal everything seemed, how calm the airship appeared as it floated closer, how steady the descent looked, how the crowd leaned forward, eager but not afraid. Only in hindsight does the moment feel heavy with foreboding. At the time, it was simply an arrival, nothing more. We should pause here to think about the role of witnesses in history. Without them, events remain numbers, statistics, records in logbooks. But with them, we gain texture. We learn how the grass smelled, how the sky looked, how the children behaved, how the sailors shifted in place. These details do not change the facts of the disaster, but they change our relationship to it. They remind us that history was lived by people, not just machines or leaders. Among the spectators were also skeptics. There were always a few who doubted airships. Some muttered about safety, others about cost, some about the politics behind German engineering. Their voices were softer, for the marvel of the Zeppelin drowned them out. Yet their doubts were not baseless. They had read of earlier accidents. They had wondered about hydrogen. Perhaps as they watched the Hindenburg descend, they felt uneasy in ways they could not quite name. And then there is the subtlety of time. Waiting at Lakehurst stretched minutes into what felt longer. The airships circled, approached, adjusted. People shifted weight from one foot to another, checked watches, sighed. The moment of landing seemed close, yet delayed, as though stretched by the air itself. This prolonging of anticipation made the suddenness of what followed all the more shocking. If you imagine yourself there, standing in the crowd, what would you be doing? Would you hold a camera, eager for the perfect shot? Would you keep a child close, telling them to look carefully at the silver giant? Would you scribble notes, thinking ahead to tomorrow's newspaper column? Or would you simply stand quietly, head tilted back, content to see the future hover above you? The people at Lakehurst were ordinary. Their lives were filled with work, families, errands, worries of the Great Depression still not far behind. Yet for a few minutes they shared in something extraordinary. They stood together beneath a machine unlike any other, watching it descend with the slow majesty of something both human-made and otherworldly. That shared experience linked them, if only briefly, in the unfolding of history. And so we must ask, when you place yourself among them, waiting for the ropes to drop, the engines to quiet, the passengers to step out, would you have sensed the thin line between routine and catastrophe? Or would you, like nearly all of them, have believed you were simply witnessing progress in action? Imagine yourself inside the Hindenburg, standing near a window, or leaning over the railing of the promenade deck. The ship has been circling slowly, descending toward Lakehurst. Outside, the field spreads wide beneath you, dotted with the tiny figures of ground crew, reporters, families, and Navy men. The sun hangs low, casting long shadows over damp grass, reflecting on the silvered skin of the airship. Everything appears calm. Yet beneath the calm, tension is palpable. The crew below and above move in precise coordination. Officers adjust ballast, watching gauges carefully, releasing water slowly to maintain balance. Engineers in engine rooms monitor pressures, temperatures, and engine vibrations. Each adjustment, each minor correction, is critical. The slightest miscalculation could cause the ship to tip forward or back, or veer sideways. To the untrained eye, all appears smooth. To the men at work, it is a high-stakes puzzle played out in real time. You notice the hum of engines beneath you, steady, constant, almost comforting. But the hum is deceptive. It is the sound of controlled power. If a valve malfunctioned, or a cylinder overheated, or a rudder shifted too sharply, that hum could turn to shriek. Officers are aware of the risk, though their calm demeanor does not betray it. Their focus is absolute. Every action has consequence. Every second matters. Passengers move slowly through lounges and corridors, curious but careful. Some look out windows at the scene below, imagining the landing as a formality. Others sit quietly, writing letters or reading newspapers brought along for the voyage. Conversations are subdued. Some joke lightly, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. Others whisper about the size of the field, the proximity of the ground crew. There is excitement, yes, but it is mixed with something unspoken, an awareness that something unusual is about to happen. Ground crew wait with ropes ready. These ropes, thick and heavy, are the bridge between the massive airship and the earth. Men grip them, sweat on their palms despite the mild weather, muscles ready for the pull that will secure the ship. Their eyes flick repeatedly between the descending vessel and the officer's signals. Timing is everything. Too soon, and the ropes might tangle. Too late, and the airship could drift or tilt. Their role is active, physical, and precise, yet almost invisible to the passengers above. The officers signal the approach. Captain Pruss adjusts the airship's nose gently, lowering it incrementally toward the waiting mooring mast. A hush spreads through the crowd below. Cameras click as photographers capture the slow descent. Children hold their parents' hands tightly. Navy men lean into the task, ready to stabilize lines as soon as the ship is within reach. Every participant above and below is playing a part in a carefully orchestrated dance. Yet there is an undercurrent, a subtle tension no one openly acknowledges. Humidity clings to the air. Moisture is heavy on the ropes and fabric. The sky is calm, but static electricity can build without warning. A slight shift of air could cause the ship to swing or sway. All precautions have been taken, but the inherent risk remains. Those trained in airship flight understand this better than anyone. They feel it in the tightening of their muscles, the precise placement of their hands, the focused rhythm of their eyes scanning instruments and horizon. Inside, stewards continue to move among passengers, offering tea or checking on comfort. They are calm, professional, careful not to alarm anyone. Their presence is reassuring. Passengers, sensing the steward's composure, relax slightly. The contrast is striking. The officers above calculating forces and pressures. The crew below gripping ropes and standing alert. The passengers believing in routine. This juxtaposition of calm and readiness defines the final moments before landing. Look closely at the subtle interactions between crew members. A signal is given. Ballast water is released in increments. A slight trim adjustment shifts the ship's balance. Riggers check the tension of lines inside the hull. Engineers note the steady performance of engines. Outside, wind brushes lightly against the ship's silver skin. No one is anxious, yet all are alert. The calm is deliberate, almost ceremonial, a ritual perfected by previous flights but never without risk. You can almost feel the collective breath of everyone present, the passengers' anticipation, the crew's concentration, the crowd's fascination. It is as if the world has narrowed to the space between the Hindenburg and the ground. Time stretches. Seconds feel longer. Each movement is deliberate, every glance measured. The enormity of the ship, suspended in air, carries with it a sense of awe and fragility. Then consider the mooring mast. 30 feet high, metal, anchored to the ground, it awaits the nose of the Hindenburg. Lines hang ready, coils at the feet of Navy men. They will be the first point of contact with the airship, the physical link between sky and earth. The moment the ropes drop is critical. Any misstep here could cause sway, tilt, or worse. The mast, seemingly simple and static, is in fact a central player in a delicate equilibrium. Passengers glance out of windows, noticing the field and crowd below. but unaware of the precise calculations occurring in the control car. They see the hum of engines, the gentle tilt of the ship, the silver reflection of sunlight on the metal skin. Some may comment to their neighbors on how majestic it looks, unaware that every inch of descent has been meticulously monitored, every shift in angle anticipated. Their awe is natural, their trust implicit, yet their perception does not capture the fine balance being maintained. The officers prepare final adjustments. Instruments are checked. Signals to the ground crew are confirmed. Ballast fine-tuned. Engines throttled just so. Every action, though subtle, matters. A misalignment of a single degree could affect the trajectory. A sudden gust could push the massive airship slightly off course. And yet, outwardly, all is calm. Routine seems intact. The landing, hours in planning, minutes in execution, is about to begin. The spectators, now mere yards from the field's edge, shift slightly as the ship descends. Cameras raised, eyes wide, they prepare to witness history, not knowing that within moments, routine will give way to catastrophe. They see nothing unusual, yet they are standing at the intersection of precision, physics, and fate. Every detail, humidity, rope tension, wind, ballast, angle, engine power, will converge in the instant the first rope drops. You might ask yourself, standing there, or imagining yourself there, how does one sense danger when all appears normal? How does a mind trained in observation distinguish between routine and precarity? For officers, crew, and spectators alike, this is history's invisible thread, holding all in a fragile balance. And as you picture that suspended silver giant above the grass, ropes dangling, engines humming, officers signaling, you can almost feel the anticipation thick in the air. The next moment will be decisive. The calm, so carefully maintained, is about to meet the unpredictable, and no one yet knows how fragile it truly is. Picture yourself on the field at Lakehurst, or perhaps inside the Hindenburg, leaning slightly over a railing, watching as the moment of contact approaches. The massive silver ship hangs suspended just above the ground, engines humming steadily, the sun casting a low glow across damp grass. Everything looks as it should. The ground crew grips ropes tightly, muscles tense, eyes scanning for the precise moment when the airship's nose will meet the mooring mast. From the control car, Captain Pruss issues signals. Officers communicate with gestures and radios. Ballast continues to shift carefully, water released incrementally to maintain balance. The hum of engines carries a sense of steady energy. There is anticipation in every movement, concentration in every gaze. The ship seems to float effortlessly, but every inch is the result of precise calculation. Ropes are lowered, the crowd murmurs, photographers adjust cameras. Children hold parents' hands tightly, their eyes wide as the enormous airship hovers above. For a fleeting moment, it seems nothing could go wrong. And yet, beneath the surface, subtle signs are emerging. A slight sway catches the attention of the officers. Perhaps a gentle gust of wind has shifted the bow. Perhaps a change in humidity has altered lift subtly. Engineers monitor pressure gauges, noting a minor fluctuation. Ground crew feel tension in the ropes, just enough to cause a momentary adjustment. For the casual observer, all is still calm. For the trained eye, these are the first whispers of instability. Inside the Hindenburg, passengers lean out of windows, smiling, pointing, marveling. Few notice the minor shift in angle, the slight twitch of the ropes. Stewards continue to circulate, serving tea or quietly checking on cabins. The ship feels as stable as ever. And yet, the smallest error, imperceptible to most, can cascade rapidly in a vessel of this size and material. Riggers in the hull sense vibrations through beams, subtle enough to seem ordinary, but their experience alerts them to the fact that forces inside the ship are changing. Hydrogen cells, enormous and delicate, expand and contract with temperature and pressure shifts. Static electricity, unseen, begins to accumulate. Every crew member who has been aloft knows the potential danger. yet outwardly, the operation proceeds as normal. Ground crew begin the labor of guiding the lines to the mooring mast. They pull steadily, muscles burning, eyes fixed on the ship. The mast awaits, 30 feet high, metal, anchored solidly in the ground. Its role is simple in appearance, yet vital. One rope too taut, one line dropped late, one misstep, and the massive airship could tip, swing, or scrape dangerously. The crew's precision is essential, their timing a delicate rhythm. And then comes a subtle, almost imperceptible moment. A small spark, perhaps, caused by static discharge. Or the rubbing of a rope against the ship's skin. No one sees it. No one expects it. But it is enough. Hydrogen, present in millions of cubic feet, is highly sensitive. A tiny ignition source in the wrong place can escalate rapidly. Passengers are unaware. They continue to admire the view, some snapping photographs, others speaking quietly to their companions. The officers, however, notice subtle cues, a shift in lift, a flicker of flame, perhaps too small to draw immediate attention, a rise in temperature in a single cell. The calm of the landing is beginning to fracture, though it remains largely invisible to most on board. From the ground, the crew feels the tension. Lines shift slightly, ropes tighten unexpectedly. They pull, trying to maintain stability. The bow of the Hindenburg lowers incrementally, approaching the mooring mast. The mast awaits, and the first rope is about to engage. In these moments, the orchestration of hundreds of tiny actions, ballast adjustment, rope handling, engine control converges. It is a delicate balance, perfectly normal until it is not. Imagine standing there, watching the first rope touch the nose. The airship seems steady. Photographers click. Children lean forward. Officers signal, adjusting throttle slightly. Ground crew secure the line. And yet, if you know where to look, subtle signs appear. A flicker of flame near the top, an unexpected lift, a whisper of heat. It is almost invisible, but it is present. The calm is beginning to yield to chaos. Inside, stewards continue their rounds, unaware that something in the hydrogen cells is beginning to change. Passengers remain oblivious. Conversations continue. Tea is served. The routine of life persists, even as physics begins to shift. This juxtaposition, ordinary activity against the backdrop of imminent disaster, is what makes history so vivid. It is not only about the explosion that will come, but the quiet moments before it, when everything seems normal. The officers make final adjustments. Engines are throttled, ballast released. Every movement is deliberate, but nature, physics, and small human imperfections conspire invisibly. The slightest misalignment, the tiniest spark, the hidden accumulation of static all combine to set the stage. What looks routine to the eye is in fact precarious, a house of cards balanced with millimeter precision. And then, as the first rope is secured, the subtle signs grow. A shift in angle, a flicker of flame, a hiss of gas. The Hindenburg, magnificent and massive, has begun its final transformation from controlled machine to a vessel in distress. The ground crew senses it first ropes pulling oddly, lines taut in unexpected ways. Officers notice minor but abnormal readings on their instruments. Engineers feel vibrations inconsistent with routine. Passengers still do not see it. They might glance at a small puff of smoke, dismiss it as a trick of the sunlight. The air feels unchanged, yet history, in its cruel precision, has already begun. One small spark, 1 minute change in pressure, one unexpected interaction between material and atmosphere, it is enough. And now, every movement, every breath, every decision counts. So we pause here, imagining that moment. The Hindenburg poised, enormous, seemingly calm. The ropes engaged, the passengers unaware, the crew tense but managing. The air still, the grass wet, the light fading. History waits in suspended balance. What is routine? What is precarity? How often does disaster arrive without warning, hidden in ordinary tasks, unnoticed by nearly everyone present? Picture yourself still standing at Lakehurst, or perhaps leaning from a promenade deck window. The first rope has touched the mooring mast. For a moment, everything seems routine. Ground crew are pulling steadily, officers adjusting ballast, engines humming steadily. Passengers glance out windows, some pointing at the mooring lines now taut, the grass below growing larger as the ship descends. It is a scene of precise choreography, and yet, beneath it, the invisible hazard waits. Then it happens. A spark ignites. Perhaps it arises from static electricity, building along a rope, or friction between the ship's fabric and a metal fitting, or the electrical system inside the control car. No one can pinpoint it exactly. But once it touches hydrogen, the reaction is immediate. Hydrogen, so critical for flight, is also extraordinarily flammable. A small spark becomes a seed. You might imagine, standing there, that the silver skin remains intact, that nothing seems amiss. To the casual observer, it is barely visible at first, a tiny flicker, a puff of smoke curling against the fabric. Yet for the trained eye of the officers, engineers, and riggers, the moment is catastrophic. They see the subtle change in the airship's outline, the glimmer that should not be there. Within seconds, it begins to spread. The fire races across the hull, moving with astonishing speed. Hydrogen, present in more than 7 million cubic feet, bursts into flame as it encounters the spark. The silvered fabric melts, twists, and curls. The ship, once a calm, floating giant, begins to distort before your eyes. Passengers might hear a faint hiss, a sound of pressure escaping, but many do not yet recognize it as imminent danger. On the ground, the crowd reacts first with confusion. Some point, some exclaim, some instinctively duck. Photographers snap frantically, trying to capture what is unfolding, unaware of the scale of disaster. The Navy crew at the mooring mast realizes immediately the lines are no longer stabilizing a calm landing, but are connected to a rapidly deteriorating structure. Their focus shifts from routine procedure to emergency response, yet options are limited. Inside, officers struggle to maintain control. Engines continue to roar, but adjusting throttle is now secondary to survival. Ballast management becomes chaotic as the fire's heat alters lift unevenly. The massive ship tilts unpredictably. Hydrogen cells rupture, expanding the flames. Smoke fills corridors, obscuring vision. Stewards try to calm passengers, but panic begins to spread as the roar of flames penetrates lounges and cabins. Passengers, until this moment largely unaware, now confront immediate danger. Some are frozen in disbelief, unsure of where to move. Others run toward exits, toward stairwells and corridors, toward what they hope is safety. The luxurious interior, plush carpets, polished wood, decorative trim becomes treacherous, igniting, melting, burning with surprising speed. The surreal contrast between elegance and destruction intensifies the horror. Riggers in the hull are caught in a nightmare. Climbing narrow catwalks surrounded by collapsing frames and rupturing hydrogen cells, they leap to safety wherever possible. Their training and courage are remarkable, but even the most skilled cannot escape the speed at which the fire consumes the ship. Steel girders twist, fabric collapses. Every structure that once provided support and stability becomes an obstacle, or worse, a trap. Ground crew at the mooring mast pull desperately at the ropes, but the airship is no longer obedient. Its descent is chaotic. The massive hull tilts, flames licking the underbelly, sparks raining down. The fire is not merely a flame, but a force that drives the ship into motion, accelerating the destruction. Observers on the ground, whether Navy men or civilian spectators, realize that this is no ordinary emergency. This is a catastrophe unfolding before their eyes. Engineers who have worked tirelessly for hours or days find themselves powerless. The systems they maintained are overwhelmed by the fire. Gauges explode, instruments melt, engines seize. Their knowledge, skill, and vigilance are unable to alter the course of events now set in motion by a tiny, invisible spark. The magnitude of the airship, so impressive in calm, becomes a liability in flame. The fire spreads in moments across the upper skin of the ship. Hydrogen expands, ignites, burns with a brilliant, almost blinding intensity. The silver hull, once reflective and elegant, turns to blackened smoke and melting fabric. Flames streak the length of the ship. Smoke fills the air, descending toward the ground in thick, suffocating clouds. The crowd shields eyes, coughs, some instinctively step back. Yet the enormity of the Hindenburg's collapse is almost too fast to comprehend. Inside, chaos escalates. Passengers shout, cry, and stumble through corridors. Stewards attempt to guide them toward exits, but smoke, heat, and flames create confusion. Some move quickly, others hesitate, unsure which way is safe. The interior, designed for comfort and leisurely observation, is now a labyrinth of danger. Stairs and hallways are engulfed in flames. Wood warps, fixtures fall, everything familiar is turning against them. Outside, flames climb the length of the airship. The ship begins to collapse, sections twisting and falling. The ground crew scrambles, pulling ropes, shouting instructions, trying to rescue those within reach. The fire behaves almost unpredictably, spreading with gusts of wind, racing across the hull, igniting debris. Observers on the field can do little beyond watch and respond when possible. Some attempt to carry passengers away. Others seek cover from falling debris and sparks. Consider the speed of it all. What took hours to plan, days to construct, moments to descend, is now destroyed in seconds. The Hindenburg, a symbol of modern engineering, of luxury and human ambition, is being reduced to ashes almost instantaneously. The transformation from calm, majestic airship to blazing inferno is both terrifying and mesmerizing. The human stories unfold within this chaos. Some survive by leaping from the lower deck, escaping flames, landing on grass, rolling to dissipate impact. Others are trapped, unable to find exits. Crew members continue to act with remarkable bravery, guiding passengers, cutting ropes, extinguishing minor flames when possible. The juxtaposition of courage and helplessness, human decision, and the uncontrollable force of fire defines the tragedy. Photographers on the ground capture it, but only partially. Cameras cannot record the heat, the sound, the fear, or the chaos fully. Witnesses later describe a sound like roaring engines, like wind through vast metal, like screaming and shouting combined. The smell of smoke, the sensation of heat, the sight of silver turning to black ash, creates an experience almost impossible to convey in words alone. And as you imagine it, flames climbing, passengers escaping, crew risking themselves, the ground littered with debris, you notice how quickly hope and order can be overtaken by disaster. What was routine seconds ago becomes unimaginable. The very air around you feels charged, not only with static and heat, but with the tension of witnessing human lives caught in a catastrophe they never expected. In those moments, the fire consumes the Hindenburg from bow to stern. Hydrogen cells rupture in succession, metal frames warp and collapse. Windows explode from heat, furniture ignites. The luxurious interior becomes a lethal trap. The airship, once a triumph of human ingenuity, is now an instrument of chaos, flames racing across its vast expanse with blinding speed. From outside, one can see how extraordinary the scale of the disaster is. The ship, longer than 2 football fields, turns into a column of smoke and fire. Passengers and crew leap to safety where possible, some surviving by courage, some trapped by circumstance. The sheer velocity of destruction leaves almost no margin for response. What seconds earlier seemed like routine now becomes a scene of unimaginable terror. And as you picture it, you must ask yourself, how fragile are our grandest achievements? How small an error or a spark or an invisible accumulation of static can topple the most meticulously constructed machine. The Hindenburg is destroyed before anyone fully comprehends what is happening. All that remains are scattered survivors, ash, debris, smoke rising into a darkening sky. Picture yourself standing on the scorched field at Lakehurst, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning hydrogen and fabric. Flames still lick at remnants of the Hindenburg, but in the midst of devastation, human resilience is already at work. You hear voices shouting, the rush of feet, the scramble of men, women, and children seeking safety. This is the moment when ordinary people confront extraordinary peril, and the decisions they make define survival. Some passengers had managed to leap from the lower deck just as the fire spread. Imagine their courage, the presence of mind, to choose jumping over remaining trapped, to trust in the soft grass below rather than the collapsing airship above. Injuries were inevitable. Burns, scrapes, broken bones, the sudden shock of impact. Yet those who acted quickly often survived. Timing, decisiveness, and the sheer will to live mattered as much as luck. Stewards and crew played an indispensable role. Even as smoke and flames engulfed the corridors, they guided passengers toward exits, pulled ropes to help lower those trapped, and in some cases, carried children and elderly passengers to safety. Their calm under pressure, learned through training and repeated practice, proved life-saving. Ordinary people, placed in extraordinary circumstances, became anchors for those who might otherwise have panicked. On the ground, Navy men and rescue personnel rushed toward the wreckage, ignoring the danger of falling debris and residual flames. They pulled survivors from the lower decks, lifted those trapped under twisted girders, and administered first aid with whatever was immediately available. Their coordination, though reactive, saved lives. Each human touch, each hand extended toward a survivor, became a vital lifeline. Children were particularly vulnerable. Some were carried to safety by parents or crew. Others were frightened and disoriented, stumbling into the arms of rescuers. The chaos was terrifying, yet remarkably, many children survived intact, shielded by adults who instinctively prioritized them. The psychological impact, however, would linger, the memory of fleeing a burning silver giant etched forever in young minds. Medical personnel were already on standby at Lakehurst, but the scale of injuries tested their limits. Burns, smoke inhalation, broken limbs, shock, the list was long. Nurses and doctors worked feverishly, triaging patients, administering care with remarkable calm, transforming fear and destruction into structured action. In these moments, medical skill intersected with human determination, providing hope amidst disaster. Some survivors escaped by climbing over collapsed sections of the hull. Others leapt from the lower decks as the ship hit the ground, rolling upon impact to dissipate the force. Each action required quick judgment. Hesitation often proved fatal. For those who succeeded, the experience became a testament to human resilience, a raw demonstration of courage and instinct. Witnesses on the ground described scenes of remarkable bravery. Strangers pulled strangers from fire. Navy men carried passengers while ignoring their own safety, and some passengers helped others escape even as the airship's destruction intensified. Ordinary humans, thrust into the extraordinary, acted in ways that would be remembered and recounted for decades. It is in these moments that history is defined not just by events, but by human character. You might imagine the noise, screams, shouts, the crackle of fire, the roar of collapsing metal, and the distant hum of emergency vehicles. Smoke filled the field, stinging eyes and lungs. Visibility was poor, yet people continued to move, guided by instinct and training. The chaos of sound, the disorientation of sight, and the terror of proximity combined to create a sensory experience almost impossible to forget. Survivors often recount moments of slow-motion decision-making. Where to run, which exit to take. Should one help a stranger or flee first? Every second mattered. Every choice could mean life or death. And yet, in these stories, common themes emerge. Courage, clarity, under pressure, empathy, and an almost subconscious understanding of physics. How far to jump, how to land safely, where to place hands and feet. Some passengers, particularly those higher in the decks, were trapped by collapsing structures or blocked corridors. For them, rescue was a combination of human ingenuity and brute force. Ground crew and Navy men lifted beams, cut metal where possible, and pulled individuals free. The scene was chaotic but organized in pockets of focused effort. These efforts highlight how survival in disasters often depends on collaboration, quick thinking, and selflessness. Firefighters and emergency response teams arrived rapidly, tackling smaller fires, preventing reignition, and aiding in the removal of the dead and injured. Their work, though less immediately visible, was critical. They stabilized the scene, allowing the evacuation of survivors to continue more safely. The importance of prepared emergency response cannot be overstated. Without it, casualty numbers would have been even higher. Consider the psychological element. Panic could have easily overwhelmed the survivors, yet many demonstrated remarkable composure. Some moved mechanically, guided by habit and training. Others acted impulsively, their instincts leading them towards safety. The variety of responses illustrates the unpredictable intersection of human psychology and immediate danger. Observing this teaches us about resilience, how humans can adapt, improvise, and survive even when circumstances appear hopeless. Stories from survivors describe the strange calm of moments immediately after jumping from the burning airship. Some lay on the wet grass, gasping for air, watching the fire consume what moments before was their home. Others immediately sought companions, helping them rise, guiding them toward medical assistance. The juxtaposition of relief and horror, safety and ongoing danger, created complex emotional states. Animals on board, though few, also faced peril. Dogs and cats, kept as personal pets by wealthy passengers, were often left behind or escaped with passengers. Their presence reminds us that human concern extends even to non-human companions in crises. These minor details provide texture to the historical account, illustrating everyday concerns amidst disaster. News reporters who survived were quick to record accounts, interview survivors, and document the scene. Their words and photographs shaped the public understanding of the disaster, yet even they acknowledged the limits of representation. Some survivors' experiences could not be fully conveyed. The smell of burning hydrogen, the roar of collapsing structures, the sensory disorientation, all were filtered through human perception and limited by the medium. Survivors were transported to makeshift triage centers, hospitals, and safe areas nearby. Some walked under their own strength, others were carried by rescuers. Medical care began immediately, with nurses and doctors treating burns, cuts, and shock. Stories of courage, both small and large, emerged from these moments. Passengers helping each other, strangers tending to the injured, and medical personnel improvising with limited resources. One remarkable aspect of the rescue was the speed with which survivors adapted to the aftermath. Some returned to the wreckage to help others. Some organized lines to carry water or supplies. Others, dazed but functioning, directed newcomers or ensured children remained safe. Human resilience manifests not only in initial survival, but in the ability to respond and organize after catastrophe. By the end of the rescue phase, the field at Lakehurst was a scene of confusion, relief, and horror. The fire had largely consumed the airship, smoke still rising, debris scattered. Survivors were gathered, injuries tended, and stories began to circulate immediately. What had seemed routine minutes earlier, the landing of a magnificent airship, had transformed into one of the most memorable disasters in aviation history. And as you imagine this, survivors clutching each other, emergency personnel working tirelessly, the remnants of the Hindenburg smouldering in the background, you are confronted with a truth that history often reveals. Human life, determination, and courage are constants, even in the face of technological failure. Ordinary people, reacting to extraordinary events, shape the immediate outcome of disaster, proving that human resilience can coexist with tragedy. We can pause here and reflect. What determines survival in moments like these? Is it luck, preparation, instinct, courage, or some combination of all four? How do ordinary decisions, where to jump, whom to help, how to move, intersect with historical forces beyond any individual's control? These questions remain central to understanding the human dimension of the Hindenburg disaster. You are standing on the scorched field at Lakehurst the morning after, the charred remains of the Hindenburg lying in twisted heaps around you. The air is still heavy with the scent of burned hydrogen and fabric. Smoke rises lazily from the wreckage, and the wet grass is trampled by rescue crews, reporters, and survivors. What has happened is both immediate and enduring. A disaster has occurred, lives have been altered, and history is beginning to record every detail. The first responders are exhausted but still working. Navy men, firefighters, and local authorities continue to stabilize the site. They remove debris, care for survivors, and preserve evidence that may explain why the disaster occurred. Photographers and journalists take their positions, documenting everything meticulously. Every angle, every frame of burnt metal, every scorched fragment is potential insight into a question that now grips the world. How could such a carefully engineered airship end in fire so suddenly? Survivors huddle together, some still in shock, others beginning to recount what they experienced. Their stories differ in detail but converge in emotion. The fear, the heat, the roar of flames, and the chaotic scramble for safety. You can sense how human memory works in moments like this, shaped by trauma, adrenaline, and the immediacy of survival. Oral histories and first-hand accounts will later become invaluable in reconstructing the disaster. They provide texture and nuance that technical reports alone could never capture. Investigators arrive quickly, drawn from multiple fields. Engineers familiar with airships, Navy personnel with expertise in hydrogen handling, meteorologists, and aviation experts. They begin a painstaking survey, examining the wreckage, interviewing survivors, and reconstructing events step by step. They note the trajectory of the fire, the condition of the ropes, the state of the ballast, and the behavior of hydrogen cells under stress. Every observation is recorded, every anomaly considered a clue. You should imagine the methodical nature of this investigation. Nothing is dismissed as irrelevant. The position of a rope, the burn pattern on a metal frame, the testimony of a single passenger all could be vital. Investigators debate, measure, and document, aware that their conclusions will carry weight beyond Lakehurst. The cause of the disaster must be determined not only for legal and insurance purposes, but for the future of airship travel itself. Theories emerge almost immediately. Static electricity, sparks from electrical systems, flammable coatings, sabotage. Every possibility is considered. Engineers and scientists analyze the materials used in construction, studying the fabric, coatings, wiring, and hydrogen containment systems. They measure how small changes in temperature and humidity could trigger ignition. Their work is painstaking, often technical, but essential for understanding the interplay between human error, environmental conditions, and technological vulnerability. Meanwhile, public reaction is swift and intense. Newspapers, radio broadcasters, and newsreels cover the disaster extensively. The dramatic footage of the Hindenburg engulfed in flames spreads worldwide, capturing both fascination and horror. Audiences are captivated by the scale of destruction, the courage of survivors, and the sheer speed at which a massive airship could be reduced to ashes. Editorials debate the safety of airship travel, the responsibilities of engineers and operators, and the human cost of technological ambition. Families mourn, memorials are held, and the first wave of psychological impact begins to ripple through society. Survivors wrestle with trauma, some haunted by images of friends and companions lost. Witnesses on the ground replay what they saw, trying to make sense of chaos. Even those far away, experiencing the disaster through radio or film, feel a sense of loss, a shared human empathy for those caught in a catastrophe that seemed impossible to prevent. Investigations continue over weeks and months. Experts test materials in laboratories, simulating ignition under various conditions. They analyze witness testimony, compare reports, and reconstruct the airship's final moments in painstaking detail. Every potential factor, weather, electrical systems, fabric treatment, human decision-making, is weighed. The final reports remain inconclusive in some respects, leaving room for debate even decades later. This ambiguity reflects the complexity of technological disasters. Rarely is there a single cause, and often the interplay of multiple factors produces catastrophe. You can see how the disaster affected airship travel globally. Confidence in hydrogen-filled zeppelins declines sharply. Planned transatlantic flights are cancelled or reconsidered. Investment dries up. Technological optimism, once buoyed by marvels of engineering and luxury, faces a sobering reality. The Hindenburg, a symbol of human ingenuity, becomes a warning about the limits of design and the risks inherent in ambition. The disaster reshapes an entire mode of transportation, influencing policy, engineering, and public perception. Beyond the technical and societal consequences, there is the human dimension to consider. Survivors carry forward not only physical scars, but emotional and psychological ones. Families of the deceased cope with sudden loss. Communities near Lakehurst are forever changed, marked by the memory of flames, smoke, and heroic rescue. These human stories endure, often overshadowed by the spectacle of disaster, yet critical for understanding the real impact. Historians studying the event note the remarkable interplay of ordinary human decisions and extraordinary circumstances. Crew members followed procedure, sometimes improvising heroically. Passengers acted instinctively. Rescue personnel performed under extreme pressure. Each decision, each small action, contributed to survival or loss. History is revealed here, not only in the flames, but in the courage, quick thinking, and endurance of humans confronted with sudden catastrophe. Technological lessons are drawn as well. Hydrogen, flammable and volatile, is identified as a central risk factor. Designers reconsider airship materials, coatings, and safety procedures. Emergency response protocols are revised. Even today, aviation experts study the Hindenburg disaster to understand risk management, contingency planning, and the importance of small details in large-scale engineering projects. The event becomes a case study in both human and technical failure. You might pause to reflect on the nature of progress. The Hindenburg represented the pinnacle of airship engineering, yet its destruction reminds us that innovation is inseparable from risk. Every technological advance carries potential hazards, often invisible until disaster strikes. The lessons extend beyond aviation, illustrating how society must balance ambition, safety, and human factors in any complex system. Memorials and records preserve the memory of those who perished. Graves, plaques, and archives document not only the dead, but also the courage of survivors. Museums display fragments of the wreckage, photographs, and artifacts, allowing future generations to witness the scale and human cost. Education about the disaster continues, keeping alive the story of Lakehurst and the Hindenburg, ensuring that even decades later, the lessons remain relevant. The Hindenburg disaster also altered cultural perception. Music, literature, and media referenced the event, sometimes as tragedy, sometimes as cautionary tale. It became emblematic of both human achievement and vulnerability, a duality that resonates through history. Public imagination was captured by the spectacle, yet informed by the consequences, a reminder that history is lived, witnessed, and remembered through many lenses. And as you consider all of this, survivors, investigators, public reaction, technological lessons, and memorialization, you notice a pattern common to historical disasters. They are rarely simple. They unfold across multiple dimensions: human, technical, social, and cultural. Each facet contributes to understanding. The Hindenburg is not only an airship destroyed by fire, it is a moment where human endeavor, vulnerability, and response intersect in a profound narrative. In conclusion, standing at Lakehurst in your mind, you observe the aftermath. The field is scorched, the air heavy with smoke, the remnants of the Hindenburg twisted and blackened. Survivors cling to life and each other, recounting experiences. Investigators carefully examine wreckage, recording every detail. The public absorbs the lessons through media, engineers rethink designs, and the future of airship travel changes forever. What seems like an isolated disaster becomes a transformative event in history, influencing technology, policy, culture, and collective memory. And so, you are left with the ultimate reflection. History is rarely neat. It is messy, dangerous, human, and technical. Catastrophes like the Hindenburg disaster are not simply accidents. They are complex intersections of design, environment, human action, and chance. They remind us of resilience, vulnerability, and the lessons embedded in every failure. As you imagine the silver giant reduced to ashes, the courage of survivors, and the meticulous work of investigators, you understand that history is alive in every detail, every story, every life affected. What remains for you to ponder is this: when you witness a human achievement, can you also see its hidden vulnerabilities? How do ordinary people navigate extraordinary dangers? And how does society learn from disaster to shape the future? The Hindenburg teaches us that every triumph carries the seed of potential failure, and in observing both, we glimpse the full spectrum of history.